Hey, this is Josh with Budget Mechanic. Today I'm going to be talking to you about brake noise. And I would separate the categories of brake noise into two groups, squeaking and grinding. And there's a lot of reasons why these noises happen, and we're going to go over the main ones right now. Before we get into the specific brake sounds, let me just show you basically how a brake system works. These are brake pads, and this is a brake rotor. And these pads are squeezed on either side of the rotor until the rotor stops, and that's what slows your car down. These are going to be on the front of your vehicle, and on a lot of vehicles, especially older ones, in the rear, instead of having a disc, you're going to have a drum. And it's the same principle, but instead of the pads squeezing on the outside of the surface, pads, or shoes as they're called in the rear, press against the inside. So you're going to have two shoes that press out against the inside and slow it down. This is a motorcycle one, just so you can see the shape, and then this mechanism pushes them outwards so that it slows your car down. A lot of newer cars have discs or rotors on the front and the rear, but sometimes you'll have both on one car. So the first category of brake noise we want to talk about is squeaking. And the most common reason for that is your brake pads wearing out. So you have a metal plate glued to that is a composite material which actually contacts your rotor and stops the car. But that eventually will wear out over time, and most brake pads have these little indicator clips installed on them if they're installed correctly, and those will start to squeak before your brake pad completely runs out. And it's designed so that it touches the rotor and makes a squeaking noise that you hear. Most times you'll hear it when you're not applying the brakes. You're just going down the road, it'll start squeaking, or when you're in reverse, often you'll start to hear it. And then when you press the brakes, the sound goes away. So if you're hearing that and it has those conditions, it's probably time to check your pads out. This is a brand new pad, quite a bit of meat on there. This is an older pad, obviously a different car, but getting quite low and quite a big difference. This one's about to hit the indicator. Another really common reason for squeaking is brake glazing, and that happens when your brakes overheat. Here on the Big Island of Hawaii, we run into this a lot because we have a lot of steep hills, high temperatures, and if you're riding down a long steep hill and you're just holding the brakes the whole way down, it's creating a lot of heat, and that's eventually going to glaze your pads and your rotor. Another way this can happen is if you leave your emergency brake on and you drive for a couple miles, creates so much heat that it actually starts burning them. Stuck calipers will do this. There's a lot of reasons, but essentially if your brakes are being pressed for too long, too hard, they'll overheat. And what this does actually is it changes the surface of this pad, which is, it looks hard, but it's actually a fiber. It's a bunch of fibers that are meant to really grab the disc, but they get glazed or burned, and they get hard and really slippery. So instead of grabbing your rotor, it just slides right across it and doesn't stop you as well, and also creates a squeaking noise. You'll see this on the pad with the surface being more shiny than it is right now. This is kind of a matte. You'll see it on the rotor. The rotor on a brand new one is smooth, but it's got these, these lines in them. But when they become a mirror-like surface, then you know you've got a glazing problem. So if you have brake glazing, you'll often hear the sound right as you're rolling up to a stop sign. Right as you come to a stop, you'll kind of hear it squeak. Or sometimes first thing in the morning, you'll kind of hear it as you're leaving. Your first time you hit your brakes, you'll hear it. It depends on how bad the glazing is as to when you'll hear it, but it can be confused with a low brake pad sound, which is why you want to get in there and check things out. Unfortunately, once you glaze your pads or your rotors or both, you need to get it fixed. It's not going to go away, so you need to get your rotors resurfaced or replaced and put on some new pads. Another really common reason for brake squeak is foreign contaminants getting into your brakes. And this could be dust, this could be water, rocks, rust. So say you're driving on a really dusty road, your brake pads are getting covered in dust, you may start to get that squeak because it's filling in the porous cracks of your pads and not grabbing like it's supposed to. Another really common reason you get it is it rains at night and you get a thin film of rust on your metal rotor. So the first time you go to stop, there's kind of a rusty dust on there and you'll get the squeak as well. If you've ever noticed you drive through a big puddle and water gets all through all of your brakes, you'll get that squeak just briefly because there's water in there messing with your surfaces. or you'll get little rocks stuck in the pads, maybe in the cracks or something like that. You'll get squeak. So it's something that usually will go away as soon as the contaminant it wears off. So it's not usually something that's permanent. The fourth reason for brake squeak, which is not as common, but definitely happens, is issues with worn out or improperly installed brake hardware. So by hardware, I mean the little retaining clips that hold your pads into the calipers, the little indicator, squeaker. There's a lot of parts to brakes, and they need to be clean, they need to be functioning properly. And some of the most common are you want to clean and lube the parts of the brake that are moving in and out with your brake pedal to make sure nothing's sticking. Otherwise you'll get squeaking noise sometimes. It is possible to get vibrations between the pad and the metal of the caliper. You can use the disc brake quiet on the back of the pad so that there's not that micro vibration. Obviously, if someone forgets to put in a piece of hardware, you'll get vibrations and stuff happening that will cause squeaking. Mismatched hardware, if you replace your rotor or your pads but not the other, they're not quite mating properly and you'll get funky sounds. So it really depends on what's going on as to when you'll hear the noise. But if you're not experiencing any of the squeaking issues that I've mentioned previously, might be time to check out your hardware. The second category of brake noise that you would hear is a grinding or a scraping noise. Usually the reason that happens is your brake pad has completely run out of pad material, and now the metal backing plate is actually starting to rub on the metal of the rotor. So it's metal to metal. It's just a nasty scraping, grinding sound, and you'll feel it in your brake pedal. You're gonna know right away. It's probably gonna happen pretty suddenly. Like one day it won't be there, and the next day it's gonna be there. And by the time you're hearing and feeling that noise, it's too late. Your pad is obviously gone, and you also are really tearing up your rotor as well. So you can look down inside your wheel and you'll see deep grooves in your rotor, unless it's starting to happen on the inside, in which case you wouldn't be able to see it from the outside. But by then it's time for new pads and new rotors. The second common reason for that scraping, grinding noise you'll hear from your brakes is due to overheating again. Like we talked about before, when your brakes get too hot, the material of your brake pad actually starts to break down. You can see on this pad where it's gotten hot, it's created a pitted surface that is no longer nice and smooth. And it can, in some cases, create a really uneven, almost like a sponge-like surface that really does not rub the rotor evenly, and you'll get kind of a grinding sound. It's different than running out of pad in that it's not going to ruin your rotor as fast, but it's definitely going to not work as effectively and have a scraping, grinding sound. For some reason, I often run into it with rear brakes. People run with the e-brake on for too long, and then whenever they come up to a stop sign, they hit their brakes and they hear in the back like a kind of a scraping, grinding. Now there are going to be other things that would cause your brakes to squeak or scrape, but the majority of the sounds you're going to encounter are going to be something that we covered here today. Well, I hope this takes some of the mystery out of your brake sounds, and thanks for watching. We'll see you again next time.